Finally figured it out. 4 weeks in. It all works. Hold the curtain. There we go. Matt? Oh, yeah. Almost not so. They'll always be yeah, I think I've done that. I'm not going to hide in the back like my students. And we will get started, if that's okay with you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here yet again, week 4 of 4. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves throughout this mission, and those joining us from home, thank you for being with us tonight. Tonight we welcome Katie Casey, who is not only a colleague of mine at Scranton Prep, she's a theology department chair. She's been teaching there for 20 years, I believe, this year. She started when she was 2. But she's also a very dear friend of mine, and I'm very, very happy to welcome her to Clark's Green, her first time at St. Gregory's. And so we're very happy to have you, Katie, and she's going to present the parables this week to us from the global perspective. Please join me in welcome. Katie, just tap that button.
Good? Okay. Sorry, get my sound set up here. This is very rock star. Thanks so much for having me. This is really so beautiful here. I was telling Father, I belong to St. Anthony and Rocco in Dunmore, and I'm told I'm like one of the 2 Irish people there. I don't know if that's true. If it is, they're very, very cordial. But this is so gorgeous. Thank you. I'm so nervous because 2 things. I have this, I would call this odd psychology. I can talk to high school kids, and like high school kids can give you a lot of dirty looks, but it's no big deal. But talking to, colleagues and peers, it always makes me a little nervous. And the other thing is, the other speakers were so beautiful. I really want to help you end this on a good note. So to use a track and field reference, I feel like I'm running the anchor leg of the relay, and I don't want to drop the baton here. Just on a side note, this has nothing to do with the parables. I do run a lot, only because I have no hand-eye or foot-eye coordination, so I just am pretty good at moving forward. And I have a lot of siblings. I'm the youngest of 10. I'm going to talk in a little minute about my next sister, Franny, who was an awesome basketball player. So in 5th grade, I tried basketball. I thought, she's so good at it. Why wouldn't I be? So I just walked onto the court like the golden girl I thought I was. And I was asked at the end of the season to kindly not return ever again. So that's what you're working with here. I know that has nothing to do with the parables, but it was such a formative experience. So I'm going to try to talk about the global perspective. I really don't have any authority to speak on this, but I do have some stories. I have some experiences I'll share with you, if that's okay. One of the great fortunes of my life, there have been many. I really have been really blessed in life, but one of the biggies was to have been educated by the Jesuits. Because when I was introduced to the Jesuits, of course, I became familiar and really came to love the spirituality of St. Ignatius of Loyola. And the short version of Ignatius' life story is that he admittedly later in life would call himself a vain soldier. He was a soldier, really out for self-glory. An injury in battle led a vain, self-absorbed soldier to eventually a life devoted to Christ. And so Ignatius, of course, goes on to found the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, right? And I've always been really fascinated with his conversion story. I know a lot of saints have conversion stories, and I love a good conversion story, but I've always been so fascinated with his because Ignatius, in the throes of conversion, right after injury, experienced a great urgency to change. And he admits that in his initial attempt to change, the Greek word metanoia, he withdrew from the world. And that didn't work out so well. His conclusion about that, his reflections, at least in 1523, and this became the foundation of his work, the spiritual exercises, was that the world is good because God is in the world. And so humanity is just challenged to engage the world. And I've always found that really powerful. I credit Ignatius and many Jesuits who I've met in my schooling and professional life, who have been teachers, friends, and colleagues, for helping me to deepen my own relationship with Jesus through the Gospels and through reflection. And I've heard a lot of Jesuits themselves say that that is what Ignatius would have wanted. He would have wanted you to become closer to Jesus, sort of through him. When I was at the University of Scranton in the 90s, two pivotal things happened. One was that I was in a car accident, a bad accident. I actually I almost drowned in a car accident. And I had what I will call an encounter with the divine in that experience. And I know this is really unbelievable. I never really talk about this. You seem like nice people. Because it's unbelievable. I don't really know that I would believe that if someone told me that, but I did have a transcendent experience, and I've had many subsequent encounters, I guess I'll call them, with the divine. A 19-year-old had a lot of trouble navigating surviving a bad accident, but also everything that kind of followed. So I mention that because spirituality was really the thing that helped me make sense of any of that. And I'm really grateful for that. The other thing, way less traumatic than that, was I had a chance to really dive into service, and I volunteered with the International Service Program at the U, and I had the chance to go to Ecuador. It was the first time I was exposed to extreme poverty, like I had never seen before. And with that comes this exercise in solidarity that really just changed me completely. When I graduated from the U, I volunteered with the Jesuits. I did Jesuit Volunteer Corps for a year, and I had another great fortune. I worked in a Franciscan parish in Bend, Oregon, a little town in the middle of Oregon, and I ran a youth ministry for the parish. JVC's motto is, "You'll be ruined for life," and the implication there is, of course, ruined in a good way. And I totally was. Spiritually, it was such a worldview shift for me. But also professionally, I learned that, high school kids with whom I worked, they have a lot to say. And they have a lot of questions to ask, and they really need to be heard. So, serendipity brought me to Prep in 2001. And that alone was awesome. I loved it. I still love it there. I love the way the Jesuits teach. I love the intellectual curiosity. I love everything about it. But I also, just as my own person, as just a human being and an educator, I got the chance to do service again. I went to El Salvador with Father Lally. And again, that was not really a service trip. I guess I really shouldn't call it that. That was an immersion experience. And again, poverty, right? Solidarity. But layered on that was socioeconomic and some socio-political elements that helped us understand, what would lead to this poverty, right? And there was this impetus again to bring it home, and let's create some change here. Within that particular experience, I did get to go to the University of Central America and see where 7 Jesuits and their housekeeper and her daughter were martyred in the late 80s. So again, that changes a person. So I did bring that back to my teaching, and I still really do. Not perfectly, I'm sure I mess this up daily, but I had a lot of experiences with the students in service too. I've been lucky enough to moderate chaperone service projects with the rising seniors. And, so much good comes out of that. I've had experiences with 17-year-olds digging ditches, raising beams, raising roofs, painting, and you really can go from laughing to crying with a kid, in the same minute. And that too, I think, is just as, it's just really just as beautiful as any other transcendent moment I've ever had. And I'm so grateful for those moments, let alone things that happen in the theology classroom, with a lot of laughter as well. Luckily the kids we teach are, able to laugh at themselves and the absurdity of their adolescence. And I definitely make fun of that a lot too. We try to teach them to be contemplatives in action. We work and reflect and work and reflect. And there's so much joy in that. So that's kind of my starting point for any attempt to provide any insight on a global perspective. I have to start with story because I don't really have anything else in my pocket. And I feel okay about doing it because in the first week of your series here, Marilyn said that people are wired for stories. And I was like, oh yeah. And I love the way your retreat evolved here. It's been so beautiful. It's been so powerful. In the second week, Father Rose said, he said so many awesome things, but one of the things I latched onto was parables are disruptive. And I just love that. And I really have been thinking about that a lot just in my own life. Last week, Father Andy also really blew me away. The kingdom is so much. It's joy. It's rush hour on the New York subway. You can think about the parables with your imagination and your neuroses. And I was like, you get me. I have so many of those. I could be so good at this. I have so many neuroses. But the thing that really got me, like Father said last week, was the kingdom is wild with mercy. And that was what I call a punch in the gut statement. I mean, I was doubled over. It was so powerful. And again, I just really thought about that in my own, in my own life the last couple of days. And I have to say, and I think I think this may be a common thread among us. Like, my parents were my first teachers of the lessons of mercy. They were, they're both in heaven simply because they raised 10 kids. But just such great people. My mom always said, like, thank God the girls were born last. I still have, stories. One of my oldest brothers, like, now the family patriarch and the storytellers, and he fully admits, like, my brothers were so bad. There were threats of, like, prison camps and schools, but I do think, like, in addition to doling out mercy, as a good parent does, like, daily to your kids, I think that just, like, the way my mother would talk about my brothers is just letting them live another day was often an act of mercy on her behalf, like, very faithful woman. But, the scriptures are clear, I think. Like, I feel like how I do this, I don't know if anyone else does this. When I think about mercy and the way Father described it last week, like, that really burrowed in my heart. Like, mercy for whom? And the scriptures are clear, right? The weak, the poor, the downtrodden, the marginalized, right? And I know, you've been reflecting on the parables, but if I could just sneak in a prophet just for a second, we really could use any one, but maybe we'll just present just a little minute of the prophet Isaiah. Those who enact unjust statutes, who write oppressive decrees, depriving the needy of judgment, robbing my people's poor of justice, making widows their plunder and orphans their prey. To whom will you flee? Like, it's so, man, that's terrifying. That's terrifying, I think, anyway. So protect the weak. Like, that's it. There's no question there. To shift back to the Gospels, this is not really a parable, but I think it's a kind of a profound story. The story of the judgment of nations, and it's long, and I know everyone's probably heard it, so I don't want to read the whole thing, but it's this presentation of judgment of nations, and it's so stark, right? This is the sheep and goats. I'm going to have, says the Lord, all the nations before me, and I'll separate, and the sheep will be on my right and the goats on my left. And then, one of the things, one of the things Ignatius, taught me, all of us really, is to put yourself in the scenario. And I have to admit, and I say this to the students, like, in a moment of vulnerability, like, this also does really terrify me. Because if I'm standing before the Lord and I've, maybe I'm with the goats on this one, and all of us are asking, why did we get put where we got put? Well, you treated me well when, I think everyone knows kind of the litany there. I was hungry. You gave me food. I was thirsty. You gave me drink. I was a stranger. You welcomed me. I was naked. I was in prison. You visited me. And then to the goats, I think that would be me. You didn't do any of those things, right? And both of us, the righteous and then me, we both would, I picture myself like just falling at the feet of the Lord. That's kind of hard for me to describe. I don't know if you have a visual of that, and both of us are just saying, when? Like, when did we do this? When did we feed you? I didn't even know I was doing it. And I would be saying, when did I not visit you, right? I feel like that's so hard, because the answer is, whatever you did to the least, you did to me like that, that just brings me to my knees. But it's clear, right? I'm not really scratching my head after I read that, like, I wonder what Jesus meant on that one, right? Take care of the poor. If I use my imagination, like Father said last week, I can envision, I'm really stealing a lot from Father last week, I'm so glad he's not here. I can envision extravagant love. I can get there, right? And then what follows, I think, is this reality of kinship. This is another term I'm shamelessly stealing from an awesome Jesuit, Greg Boyle, who started a ministry focused on gang rehab in LA County. And he started what's called Homeboy Industries, and it's been up and running for 30 years. My students have said I'm a little obsessed with him. I met him, I have his books, I got them signed, I got a picture, I got a selfie, and I just love the guy. Like, sometimes kids will say, I can't invest in this faith because I don't have any proof that it's real. Like, I don't have any proof of God. And I'm like, I do totally get that. But I'm like, look at people, right? I feel like Father Boyle is he is Jesus walking on the earth. Anyway, I kind of digressed there a little bit. I just mentioned him because his vision of kinship works and clicks so much for me with what Father said last week, right? Kinship does not disregard anybody. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for me to surrender judgment and exercise compassion. And that is a challenge for me. I got to be honest. I've really come to love Father Boyle and his spirituality of awe. I'm just going to quote him quickly here. He says in one of his books, just happen to have it here, barking to the choir, awe softens us for a tender glance of God that enables us to glance in just the same way. And that brings me to my knees the same way that gospel does about sheep and goats, but kind of in a little bit of a different way, if that makes any sense. So I want to maybe pivot slightly a little bit here and just offer some thoughts on how this shakes out, how it works itself out in the theology classroom, just what some of my experiences have been. The ultimate goal in teaching theology at a Catholic Jesuit high school is to get kids, when they go out into the world, to want to foster a relationship with God. No big deal, right? You have 4 years to do it. But I feel like, and maybe you have thoughts on this, like I am not going to invest in a relationship that does not have any meaning. So, part of the challenge is can you get, let's say like a 14 through 18-year-old to see meaning in what's already there. So it's not so much like meaning making, I don't think anyway, but illuminating what's already happening in your adolescent life. And it's truly beautiful when it happens, and it's really kind of a gift to see as a teacher, and I'm sure as a parent as well. So I teach freshmen and juniors, which is also so cool because for the most part, I can see how kids have matured, obviously, right? And you have children, you know this. But so, like developmentally speaking, in a high school theology program, and I'm not going to get super technical here. Freshman year is Hebrew scripture, and there's a point where we get to the prophets, and I feel like kids do pretty well with this, right? The prophet as advocate, they get that, the protector. And if there's time, sometimes we run out of time at the end of the year, but I like to do a little Amos. Amos was big on woes, right? You seem like people who love a good woe. I know I do. The third woe, those who lie on beds of ivory and lounge upon their couches, they shall be the first to go into exile, right? And the carousing, my mother used to love the word carouse, the carousing of those who lounge shall cease. Like kids get that because it's so vivid. The bed of ivory, right? So who do you want to be? You want to be the protector, right? And if you are maybe even more radical, maybe you want to oppress the oppressor. But we have to kind of hold back on that because we don't want kids to go out and start doing super radical things. But I always call that like a fire in the belly. These prophets had a fire in the belly, man, and it was unstoppable. And also the prophets had no friends because no one wanted to hang out with them. Because of their prophecies, right, you better change or the Lord's coming for you. No one wants to hang out with Amos on the weekends or whatever. So then it kind of comes back around. My experience has been junior year. They're ready for a little philosophy. Well, they're ready for a lot of philosophy, really. So one of the things we do is try to talk about the classical philosophical definition of justice, which is the attempt to give the other his or her due. And then you have to have a conversation about who is the other, right? And that's where it gets so interesting. The attempt to give, I'll just say you here, right? Like you, your due, that begs empathy. That just is not going to happen unless I enter into your experience. And I think that requires so much energy, spiritual and intellectual. But the fascinating thing I share is that, and if you have kids, I think you can relate to this because you've seen it firsthand. You know, all of this philosophy and theology, really, you know, you try to get them to think it's coming from your experience, right? This philosophy, this theology, this spirituality is giving you language to what you already know and do and love and what's in your heart. So anyway, it sometimes starts as fairness, right? But the cool thing is, with a little TLC, it really can flourish to this global perspective. And I have had like pretty good success in, you know, trying to get students to think about like dessert, right? So like every kid knows, you know, what it's like to be not treated fairly, and it starts so self-centeredly. You know, I was the youngest, as I mentioned, or I am the youngest, so I was like heavily doted upon. I didn't have to compete for anything. My next sister, Franny, swears she lived a golden life for 4 years because she was number 9. I came along and ruined everything. So when, you know, let's say mom is cutting cake for dessert, I would say her piece is bigger. That's not fair, right? But that's not the kingdom. The kingdom would have me say, you know what, Mom? Judy, her name is Judy. Franny didn't get enough. Give Franny a little bit more. And that takes work. And sometimes it is kind of neat to see the kids acknowledge that, yeah, I do that. I already do that. I get that. Like I get the empathy thing. And you just drew out of a teenager what she or he is already doing. And then, awesome moment here, you're not talking about justice, you're talking about God's loving justice, right? And I just think that's really just a great moment. You know, like on a secular level, moral philosophers call that stages of moral development. And I do get that. But to add, you know, the spiritual layer in there, it's that you're making the kingdom happen. You're not trying to get into heaven anymore. You're too mature for that. You're trying to make the kingdom happen. And it's hard, but it's so worth it, right? So this is worth your investment, right? That does, you know, discussions of fairness, as you might imagine, that can take us down an avenue of who gets what and who decides. And, you know, I found that some teenagers are a little bit more vocal and just a little bit more, I'm going to use the word aggressive, about wanting to know, like, who gets what, and is something being taken away from me? It's a great conversation to have because that is really what distributive justice is. So rather than fight about that, I really have in the past, and this has really worked well, I think, I've deferred back to Father Boyle, I feel like he's spokesperson. And I want to just read something that he wrote in Tattoos on the Heart. It is a little bit long, but I don't want to paraphrase this because I feel like I just wouldn't give it justice. So he says this: Jesus chose a oneness in kinship and a willingness to live in others' hearts. Jesus was not a man for others. He was with others. There's a world of difference in that. Jesus didn't seek the rights of lepers. He touched the leper even before he got around to curing him. He didn't champion the cause of the outcast. He was the outcast. He didn't fight for improved conditions for the prisoner. He simply said, I was in prison. The strategy of Jesus is not centered in taking the right stand on issues, but rather in standing in the right place with the outcast and those relegated to the margins. I'm going to be honest, like sometimes with the 17-year-old, sometimes that lands and sometimes it does not. But I do think it's worth the effort. That's what my own experience has been. Just as a little wrap up here, and Danny knows this, I went into the summer this year like really, really agitated, mentally and spiritually for sure. And I could not really wrap my mind around it. Obviously, it was from, the results of being locked down. Teaching online was a near disaster for me. It was really a challenge. But thank God, the kids were so good. But my mom died in May, and she did not die of COVID, but she died obviously in the throes of COVID. And my siblings and I could not be with her. And that really continues to be, it's just in my head so much. I would love to think that I'm the only person in this room who lost somebody during COVID, and remains just a little incomplete, but I really just don't think that's the case, sadly. We also were not, like some of you, I'm sure, we really weren't able to mourn her. I'm going to use the word properly. I know that sounds like a little bit strange. So when Marilyn the other day, made the comparison of stats versus stories, like that really makes sense to me. And I am so in community with lots of people who are, struggling with that. And because that really, just got in my heart and mind when I, started the summer and just saw so much division and violence and unrest. It just has bothered me so much. And I have to admit to my colleagues at the beginning of the school year, I really do not know what to do with that. I feel like a range of emotions. I have a visceral, gut feeling. Something is not right. So much is not right. And I didn't necessarily say, this is not the kingdom, but I had that thought without using the language. I was like, this is not how things are supposed to be. And that urgency that I guess maybe Ignatius felt, I feel like I had that too, because after I was trying to make sense of life after my car accident, I too felt very immediate about changing everything about my life. And I always tell the kids, a lot could change in college. I went in as a bio major and came out with a philosophy degree and then volunteered with the Jesuits, and look at me now. So I remember sitting in organic chemistry class, sophomore year, thinking, this carbon molecule is just not doing it for me. I need some meaning here, right? And also my chemistry teachers passing me, that was an act of wild mercy, no doubt. Really big credit goes there. But I felt like, what should I do? Should I save the whales? I'm going to join Greenpeace. I should probably become a nun. I'm definitely going to quit school today and go out and just radicalize the world. Part of it is you think, I don't know how much time I have, and that was a wake-up call, so I better get moving. And I guess that's why I'm attracted to Ignatius' story, because he wanted to do everything so fast. And the Holy Spirit had him kind of pump the brakes and rely upon slow spiritual movements. But I mention that because this spring and summer and beginning of the school year, I felt the same way. I have to do something. But then I thought, man, I'm in front of these kids. I don't want to be like a maniac. Someone told me, this was great advice for me, calm down a tiny bit. Because guess what? Education is an act of justice. Filled with moments of failure, but it is a marathon. You have to have the long view here. But I just want to share one more thing that happened in my classroom, really within the first 3 weeks of school. In my ethics class, we're kind of just talking about truth, epistemology, how do you know what you know, and trying to get them to think are there objective standards of truth and where do they come from? So I sort of started with fairness and asked one class in particular, is fairness in a classroom possible? We had a cool discussion about that, very illuminating for me. And then I said, what about in the world? Is fairness possible? Is justice real? That's an ideal. And it was a Friday. It was the last period of the day. I have a young woman who sits in the back. To this point, pretty quiet. Obviously, the kids are masked, so you really can't see anything. You definitely can't see their expressions. But when I asked, is justice possible, I really was like ready to wrap. Okay, have a great weekend. See yous. And she looked up. Her eyes were giant, and she just went like this, looking right into my soul. She just went like this. And like, I could cry, but I won't in front of strangers because it's a sign of weakness. But I don't know how I didn't just double over and weep. My heart was beating so fast. I felt so badly, and just for 30 seconds, my mind was flooded with the possibility of scenarios that would cause this young woman to do that. And nobody saw it because she was in the back, and I said, do you want to say anything about that? And she said, yes, I'm Muslim, and went from there. And I asked her classmates if they wanted to respond, and I know teenagers can be goofy, but man, these kids are so good. They are so tender when the situation demands that of them. And they really try to be with her on it. And I had to ask, what is this? Like, what is a world where people do not see and feel when we're marginalizing people? Like, I asked, do you not think, is there not a human reaction when you know that you're taking someone's dignity away? Does nothing happen? And a few of them said, well, in this case, I think, we're just not taught. And I said, we have to revisit this because is that really the case? And philosophers would say that empathy is one of the earliest ethical stirrings that people experience, little kids. And I thought, I don't know, don't you have a pit in your stomach when you see injustice? And I'm not talking about necessarily global injustice, but when you just see people or groups being pushed out or made less. And I have to say, it was not a fairy tale ending to the class because they didn't really know what to say. But I'm glad about that. I'm glad they didn't try to sugarcoat it. And the good thing is we have a year, and they're juniors, so they have a lot of time to work it out. But I'm so grateful to that young woman for I don't even know if she knew she was shaking her head. I did not realize until I watched Father Andy's talk that the thing that was in the pit of my stomach was wild mercy for this girl. And I think it's changed everything about this year, which of course is not a normal year in any respect, education for sure. I'm going to end, if it's okay with you, with a really short poem from a poet who I really just kind of came to, and I even hope I pronounced his name properly. Sorry, my bad. I apologize. I don't often wear microphones, but when I do, it's this is from Galway, Kinnell. On the mountain tonight, the full moon faces the full sun. Now could be the moment when we fall apart or we become whole. Our time seems to be up. I think I can even hear it stopping. Then why have we kept up the singing for so long? Because that's the sort of determined creatures we are. Before us, our first task is to astonish, and then, harder by far, to be astonished. Hope I did okay. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
I'm going to mute myself now. It's a power move, kids would say.
Well, thanks everybody. Again, we thank Katie for being here with us and for wrapping up our mission here in this parable project. As we've done each week, we will move into church for Vespers. If you're able to stay with us, we'd love to have you for that prayer service. But thank you for coming each and every week. I hope you've gotten something out of this. I know I have, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to do stuff like this moving forward. Thanks everybody. Head inside.